Hi, my name is Dr. Natalie Heinsberg, and today I'm talking with Diane Legg, who is an occupational therapist and works at the Austin Hospital as a support coordinator, providing comprehensive support groups to people living with brain cancer and their family. I'll hand over to Di now for this mini lecture.
Thank you, Natalie, for that introduction. And hi, everyone. What I'd like to talk to you today is about three particular important areas. The first is finding good information and resources that can help support you. The second area is navigating changes in thinking and behaviour. And the third, and probably the most important area, is how to look after yourself in the very important carer role that you play. The first thing is finding helpful information and resources that is going to help you make clear decisions and support yourself and your family in the things that you need to deal with. So it's important to get reliable information that's clear, that kind of suits the way you and your family make sense of information. So we all understand information very differently. We process things differently, we remember things differently, and I think it's important to collect and get information based on how it makes sense for you and your family. Brain cancer and its terminology can be pretty complex and at times very overwhelming. Being in unfamiliar territory, you need to kind of be a bit kind to yourself and ask questions of the people that you're dealing with, and don't be afraid to ask them to go back to the beginning or get them to ask them to explain it a bit of a different way. Perhaps ask them to draw a picture or a bit of a diagram, or maybe there's a resource that they would use or a bit of a map that might map things out a little bit for you. Some people need loads and loads of information and other people don't want a lot. So I think it's often to take things on in readable chunks is a better way of doing things. Try to dip in and dip out of information if you get a whole lot, and take things in chunks. One of my colleagues often says you don't need to get your PhD in this overnight, and that's very true. However, some people like to do a bit of a deep dive. It's important, again, to take that in chunks, and I'll talk a little bit about internet searching shortly. You might want to think about outsourcing the searching to another person in the family or a friend, so you don't have to deal with absolutely every part of that sort of information gathering. I do try to warn people off the Dr. Google as a starting point, mainly because it can be a really unfiltered minefield of very scary information that often isn't very heavy on detail. It's better to start with a recommendation or a government website or the sort of the .org.au options. What you're looking for is information that's going to support you and be a helpful resource to you and not overwhelm you. It's important in the beginning to have a balanced view that's going to help you weigh up pros and cons of things, and it portrays very accurate details about brain tumour or brain cancer. It can be really difficult to compare yourself with other people in this because everyone's experience is quite different, and blogs that often appear on the internet can really talk about people's lived experience. And whilst it can be useful to hear other people's take on things, think of it like a conversation with them rather than it being sort of medical evidence. Some commercial sites have sort of .com or .com.au might be promoting a particular service or medication, which may not necessarily be applicable to your situation. So just be a little bit aware that it's a bit of a different profile of those sites. And there's a number of other resources that are Australian-based, which are really helpful as well. Natalie will put those resources up. I think it's quite important to have a little bit of an understanding of some of the key challenges, I suppose, with this kind of illness. Again, it can be a little bit different for everybody, and it's good to spend a little bit of time having a think about and asking perhaps the treating team about what certain areas might mean. So how it affects people's thinking can really depend on which part of the brain is affected. what treatments are given and have been had, and also what medication is taken. And perhaps if there's symptoms like seizures, that might make a bit of a difference to how the brain functions. All that means is it's not really easy to predict how this diagnosis is going to impact on someone's thinking and behaviour until it actually starts happening. Our brain's like a very, very quick computer, and when there's something that is interrupting the flow of that information, it can really slow down the way someone processes. Things take a little bit more effort and energy from the brain. So an important thing is that people need more time. For things that we can do in a nanosecond can take longer and require more energy to perform for someone with brain cancer. So one of the most important strategies is giving people some time to speak, time to think, and time to process information. The other thing to think about is the impact on memory, and because there's a bit slower processing, that means that perhaps there's a slight reduction in attention, and this can impact on people's ability to retain information. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about the impact on behaviour. So not everyone with brain cancer experiences dramatic change to their behaviour, but it is common for people to deal with their world a little differently. So that might be because they've been through a very confronting health situation. It might be that they're a little less tolerant, perhaps a little bit more blasé about a situation, or perhaps a little bit less engaged in what's going on around them. Attention and processing speed can have a big impact to our responses in the moment. And so someone might feel quite different or respond quite differently, and that's because it's a bit harder for their brain to manage all the subtleties that they previously did. I suppose it's giving someone some time, perhaps being aware that busy environments, loud environments, bright environments, moving environments can overload people's brain in terms of working out what to ignore and what to focus on. So sometimes taking people down into a quieter environment can help with that behaviour. Some people with brain cancer find it difficult to notice their behaviour and monitor their behaviour and responses. And what makes that hard is that they're unable to make modifications. So I always recommend that people appoint a champion, and that might be you as the carer or someone who knows them really well, that they trust, that can sort of either notice when things are not quite right and gently remove people from the environment, perhaps afterwards can give them a little bit of feedback and come to an agreement about what are some ways of managing that. I guess the important thing that kind of ties in with that is actually the impact of fatigue. And what we do is we ignore things that need to be ignored, like the sound of air conditioning or busy or people speaking in the background. We don't have to focus on that. But I think when processing is a little challenge, like your thought processing is a bit challenged, it can be harder to ignore those things. So people can get very fatigued very quickly, and fatigue or tiredness and low energy has a very significant impact on people's quality of life. I would say that it's probably one of the most common symptoms talked about. It can really make a big difference to how people manage their day-to-day activities, and it can really make an impact on how people think and behave. And it's really important that you have a strategy to manage fatigue. It's usually a multi-pronged strategy of some exercise, good sleep, good nutrition. Sometimes behaviour change can be because someone is very tired, and their way of showing that is not yawning, but it's into more perhaps intolerant behaviour or being a bit snappier or something like that. So where do you get help? That's a really important thing. So I think liaising with the treating team, asking them about what might be the potential impact on thinking and behaviour is important. To ask about what are some ideas for managing fatigue. But treating team and GP are a good starting point. Having a neuropsychological review can be a helpful way of getting some additional information. However, if that's not always possible, looking at referrals to perhaps a speech pathologist or an occupational therapist can be good, because they will deal with cognitive challenges and also deal with some strategies around management of those things. Brain injury services can be quite helpful, and I think when people are diagnosed with brain tumour or brain cancer, often those sorts of services aren't considered, but they're very relevant. Whilst it's not a brain injury as a result of an actual traumatic event, there is some damage to the brain, perhaps as a result of treatment or the tumour itself. So they can be helpful resources. And the other thing is accessing the NDIS, or the National Disability Insurance Scheme. The last point I'll sort of say about this is about communicating with others and ensuring others understand what's going on for the person that you're caring for can be really helpful, and it will provide you with support and a way to sort of share these challenges. I think seeking help and highlighting these issues too with the treating team is an important way to get help and develop some of those strategies that will maximise everybody's quality of life. The important thing to highlight here is that having a plan for yourself is like putting on the oxygen mask first when something happens in the plane. So it's really important to make sure that you look after yourself as a matter of priority. You're in a really important caring role, and you are playing a pivotal role in the treatment and care of a person with brain cancer. So if you as the carer is struggling, then the wheels can quite quickly fall off what's going on. A self-care plan doesn't need to be complicated. It can, or full of expensive massages. It needs to be a plan that's really just for you, filled with the things that are important and that help you. So it might be a regular walk, a coffee with or a cup of tea with a friend, a bit of gardening, a chapter of a good book, or just a good soak in the bath. But doing those things that are regular and finding the things that work for you is really important. Maintaining your personal connections with friends and your usual supports is part of this. If you're not working due to your role as the caregiver, try to maintain some of those social connections with your work colleagues if that's possible. It helps keep those connections to your identity going, and I think social connection can, not always, but can give you an opportunity to debrief and having someone around who's just for you. The next part of it is sort of building your toolkit or your resources for the future. So taking regular time out from the beginning is a great thing to establish. So I suppose it helps you prioritise that you're an important part of this puzzle as well, and that it helps you try different things that you might need to use to sort of to look after yourself. Maintaining some of your hobbies or interests, even if it's just in a small way, is important. Whatever it is, doing things that bring you a little bit of joy and that you're enjoying, finding some space to do that in your week. It's important to have a few things up your sleeve. That's not just, I'm only going to get a break if I exercise, but having a few different things that are going to help you look after yourself. The last thing, and this can be a little bit of a big challenge for people, is to accept help. I think that gorgeous expression, "it takes a village to raise a child," can be equally applicable in this scenario. It can take a village to care for someone with brain cancer. People want to help, okay? So, but they want to be able to have something useful to do. So having a bit of a task list of things that you feel comfortable with other people doing can be good. So when someone asks to help, say yes, that would be great. If you could sit with Ben while I'm out at the shops, or if you could take, my daughter to her netball match, or take me out for a coffee so I can be brief, or make one of your famous chicken curries. Building a team around you can be really important. Okay. And the last thing I'm going to do is just talk about a few resources. Obviously, the Cancer Council Australia, there is a specific Queensland Health website that sort of has some great links, and there are recommended links for use by people in Queensland. I mentioned Brain Tumour Alliance, being a patient advocacy organisation, can have some helpful things. I was involved in the Building a Bridge to Life with Brain Cancer, and that's something that I guess focuses more on the living with. The Brain Tumour Charity is a UK site, and that has some great information, particularly about managing fatigue. Cure Brain Cancer Foundation has information. That's an Australian organisation. And there was a video talking about a common path and people diagnosed with a high-grade glioma. It's actually got a number of people talking about their experience, and I think that that's quite a good video. As I mentioned, Brain Injury Australia, Synapse are sort of more related to brain injury. And then the Brain Cancer Group and the last resource, which is a caregiver program that is US-based, but actually has got some really helpful tips in it, is another resource. So I hope that's been of use, and all the best.